My name is Isla Trenner, and I've spent my whole life pretending my parents didn't forget me, while silently hoping maybe, just maybe, they hadn't. I didn't expect them to say sorry, I didn't expect a hug, or even a seat at the head table, but I never expected that. If you've ever been the outsider at your own family's celebration, the ghost they politely ignore, just long enough to feel real pain, you need to hear what happened that night, because when my father told me to leave, in front of 80 guests, I thought the worst was over. But it wasn't. And what followed turned this into one of those revenge stories, not with fire and fury, but with grace sharp enough to cut glass. The invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock, engraved with navy blue serif fonts, classic Trenor style. Thomas Trenor cordially invites you to an evening in honour of his retirement from Trenor Capital. No Dear Isla, no note, no warmth, just the announcement, like a press release slipped into my mailbox. Still, I told myself it meant something, that maybe after 35 years of being the emotional liability of the family, maybe this was an olive branch, a crack in the cold wall. Noah, my husband, raised an eyebrow when I showed it to him. "You really think he wants to see you?" I shrugged. "I think maybe he wants to include me, just this once." He didn't answer right away. Just sipped his coffee, then said quietly, "Or maybe he wants to remind you that you're still not part of their picture." I hated that he might be right, but I needed to believe otherwise. The event was held at the Rosemont Hotel, top floor, Boston Harbor. A view of the water, all glass walls and gold lighting. You could smell old money and ambition the second the elevator opened. Servers floated past with champagne flutes, women in floor-length navy gowns, men in cufflinks that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. We were seated at table 12, by the fire exit, near a ficus tree. Simon and Celeste, my older siblings, sat flanking my parents at the main table, directly in the spotlight. Their names printed in gold on the place cards. Mine said Mrs. Isla Trenner, handwritten in black ink. Simon raised his glass at us from across the room, smirked, and turned away. Celeste didn't even glance up. I reached for my water. My hands were shaking. Noah placed his hand on my knee. "You're here. That's enough." The evening went through the motions, speeches, applause, praise. The CEO of Trenor Capital called my father a pillar of modern finance. Someone told a golf joke that made the entire table of investors wheeze with laughter. And then came the toast. The lights dimmed. A spotlight warmed my father's silver hair. He rose, holding his crystal glass as if it were the Holy Grail. "Tonight," he began, "is not about the numbers or the deals. It's about legacy. About what remains after the office door closes." He looked down the head table. "Simon, my strategist. Celeste, my compass. You two have carried our name with pride, with power." The applause came fast. Glasses clinked. Someone cheered. Then silence, because he turned. He looked straight at me. I remember the exact way he said it. Calm, controlled, like he was reading a memo. "And Isla, you may leave now." No, thank you. No sarcasm, just dismissal. A command, not a sentence. The sound of my chair scraping back was the only thing anyone heard for a second. All eyes on me, some curious, some smug, some pitying. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears, my face burning, not with rage, not yet, just shame. Deep, raw shame. Noah stood too. His face was stone. But I wasn't ready to walk. Not yet. I couldn't even feel my legs. That was the moment everything cracked open. Not just the image I'd built of, maybe they love me deep down. No, it was the lie I'd told myself for years. If I just do enough, become enough, they'll see me. And instead, he looked at me like I was noise. A mistake he hadn't managed to erase yet. The room returned to its conversation. Plates clinked, Forks moved. My father sat down, smiled, and took a sip of wine like he hadn't just destroyed the last bit of hope I was clinging to. It wasn't an outburst. It wasn't cruelty in the way people expect it. That's what made it worse. It was planned, measured, delivered with the kind of precision only someone who's always held the power knows how to use. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a crack in the wall. This was the wall. We left. But not in silence, because right before I turned away, I saw something across the room, a woman I hadn't seen in years, her face familiar but not from my past, from my work. I didn't know then what she would do, but she, Amira Holt, was about to shift the night in a way none of us expected. And my father? He was about to lose control of a room he thought he owned. The thing is, my father didn't just decide to humiliate me at his retirement party out of nowhere. That moment was just the exclamation mark at the end of a sentence I've been reading since I was 10 years old. In our house, love wasn't unconditional. It came dressed in expectations, disguised as discipline. And if you didn't fit the mould, you weren't punished. You were erased. Growing up in the Trenner household was like living in a museum. Everything was polished, expensive, and unnaturally quiet. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor, didn't yell. They didn't have to. One look from my father could freeze a dinner table. My mother's silence could echo louder than a scream. My older siblings thrived in that world. Simon was practically born in a Brooks Brothers blazer. By 13, he could explain market trends better than half the hedge fund managers my father played golf with. Celeste, valedictorian, gymnast, piano recitals, Yale undergrad, fast track to med school. Then there was me. I used to hide under the dining table with a flashlight and poetry books. I cried when fictional characters died. I painted murals inside my closet, and for every A I brought home in English, my father would raise an eyebrow and say, "You know, Isla, stories won't feed you." Once I handed him a short story I'd written for a school contest. He didn't even look up, just slid the page back across the table and said, "Does it have a point, or is it just feelings?" That was his favourite word to weaponize, feelings. He said it like it was a stain on my record. When I got accepted into Emerson with a scholarship to study literature, I was thrilled. I ran into the kitchen, waving the letter, waiting for someone to smile. My mum blinked. "Emerson? For writing?" My dad said nothing, just took a sip of his scotch and turned back to his newspaper. A few days later, I got a formal letter from his office, not from him. From his office. It read, "As previously discussed, financial support will be allocated to academic programs that demonstrate long-term career utility." That was his version of no. Not even a phone call, not even a conversation. So I worked. 3 jobs, dorm RA, library desk clerk, part-time barista. I survived on granola bars and gas station coffee. I remember once passing out in the hallway outside my lecture hall from sheer exhaustion. When I told my mum weeks later, she said, "Well, college is about learning responsibility." I remember just staring at the phone. Responsibility? I was 19, paying my own tuition. Alone in a city where no one knew my name. What more did they want? But nothing hurt more than what happened when Mum got sick. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. She was gone within 6 months. And in those final months, I was the only one who stayed. Simon sent money for a private nurse. Celeste came by once a week, briefly, always in a rush. But me, I fed her, bathed her, held her hand through the night when the pain made her shake. I dropped out for a semester. No one asked me to. No one offered help. At the funeral, people kept telling me, "Your mother was so proud of all 3 of you." But I remembered her last words to me, whispered in the dark, "Don't become like him. Don't go cold to survive." I think that's when I really started noticing the difference. Not just how they treated me, but how easy it was for them to forget I existed unless I served a purpose. Let me ask you something, and feel free to answer this in the comments if you've ever been through it. Have you ever done everything you could? everything to be loved by someone who only loved you when you were useful? Because that's exactly what it felt like. It's not always about getting hit or shouted at. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes being abandoned looks like them smiling at your sibling's wedding toast, but skipping yours completely. Sometimes it looks like being edited out of your own family photos. Yes, that happened to me. And if that stung even a little, say it, tell me, because I swear I'm not the only one. Anyway, by the time I graduated, I no longer expected applause. I started a small indie press, Seedlight, because I believed there were other voices like mine out there, people who'd been talked over, written off, and I built something with no help, no last name behind me, no connections. But even with all that, even after years of therapy and success and growth, when that retirement party invitation came in the mail, I still felt it, that old itch, that ridiculous hopeful whisper, maybe this time they'll see me. You'd think that kind of hope would die after a few decades of being overlooked. But sometimes, hope is the most stubborn wound of all. And now you see why that night, when he told me to leave in front of everyone, cut so deep. It wasn't just about the words, it was about every moment that led to them, every time I was told, without them ever saying it directly, that I didn't matter. But what my father didn't know, that night, I wasn't alone. And someone was about to make that very, very clear. It's strange how easy it is to build something that looks solid, while carrying around the parts of yourself that never really healed. I didn't wake up one day and decide, I'm over it. That's not how being unwanted works. What happens is, you keep moving. You get tired of waiting for applause that never comes, so you learn to clap for yourself. That's how Seedlight Press was born. I started it with $7,200 in savings and a used Epson printer. My office was the corner of our one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, next to the kitchen window that leaked every time it rained. The first year we published 2 titles, both written by authors who'd been rejected by every major house in New York. One of them, Amira Holt, had been living in a shelter when I read her manuscript. It was raw, honest, unfiltered. No publisher wanted to touch it. Too angry, they said. Too political, not marketable. I read it in one night and called her the next morning. It's brilliant, I said, and I want to help you tell the whole world. We printed 500 copies, sold them out in 2 weeks. A year later, she got a feature on NPR. A year after that, a film option. And through it all, she never stopped calling me the one who saw me first. I should have felt complete. I had a purpose, a business, a partner who saw me, friends who didn't flinch when I talked about grief or trauma or guilt. But deep down, there was still a little voice inside me whispering, maybe now they'll see you. Maybe if you succeed hard enough, even the people who threw you away will come back to say, I was wrong. Noah knew. He never said it outright, but he felt it. He'd catch me rereading my father's rare texts. He knew when I got quiet after family holidays passed with no word from them. We met at a used bookstore, if that tells you anything. I was holding a worn copy of The Master and Margarita. He reached for it at the same time. I looked up, ready to fight for it. He smiled and said, You first, but I'll trade you for coffee. We talked for 3 hours. He didn't ask what I did. He asked what I loved. He didn't ask how many followers Seedlight had. He asked why I named it that. Because even the smallest light matters, I told him, especially in places where people are told to disappear. He said that sounded like something I should put on a wall someday. I married him 2 years later. The wedding was held in the backyard of a brownstone we'd rented for the weekend. 32 guests, all chosen, all real. My family wasn't there. My father never replied to the invitation. My mother sent a 2-sentence RSVP. We're unable to attend. Do not contact further. Simon and Celeste didn't even bother pretending. I told myself I was fine, that this was closure. But on the night before, I remember sitting by the window, watching raindrops hit the glass and thinking, if they had just called, even once, I would have answered. A year passed, then another. Seedlight grew. We launched a mentorship program, won a City Arts grant. One of our books made a regional prize shortlist. And then it came. The invitation, cream cardstock, embossed navy ink. You are cordially invited to a retirement gala honouring Thomas Trenor, founder and CEO of Trenor Capital. There was no Dear Isla, no handwritten note, no acknowledgement of the past, just formality wrapped in gold trim. I stared at it for a long time. Noah looked over my shoulder and said, "You don't have to go." "I know," I replied. But inside, that old ache flared again. Maybe this means something. Maybe it's a gesture. What if this is the one time he's trying? I took a week to decide. The thing is, when you grow up craving approval from someone who never gave it, even the smallest possibility of it feels huge. It messes with your compass. Noah and I sat on the couch the night before the party. My dress was already hanging in the closet, my heels lined up by the door. He reached over, took my hand, and said, "He doesn't get to define you anymore, Isla." And I knew he was right. But what I felt was, I still want him to try. It's messy. It's not heroic, but it's human. I went anyway. I dressed like I was going into battle. Steel grey sheath dress. No shimmer, no lace, no softness to misinterpret. Hair pinned back, lips matte, shoulders back. I didn't go to be seen. I went to confirm what I already knew. And maybe, secretly, to prove him wrong. You'd think after everything I'd be numb to him by now. But pain doesn't always fade. Sometimes it gets organised, stacked neatly into little boxes, labelled when he didn't come, when he didn't call, when he didn't say my name. And when I walked into that ballroom, I was carrying every single one, because even after building a life from scratch, a part of me still walked in as the little girl who used to slide her story drafts under his door and wait. Only this time, I wasn't waiting. I was watching, and I had no idea who else might be watching too. I knew we didn't belong the second we stepped off the elevator. The air at the top of the Langford building was sharp with money. Everything gleamed. Glass walls, gold fixtures, polished marble floors. Servers in black and white uniforms moved in perfect rhythm, offering champagne like it was oxygen. A string quartet played somewhere in the distance, and the skyline of Boston stretched endlessly beyond the glass. I looked down at my steel grey dress, tailored, clean, no frills, and for a second I felt like a paper doll in a world of porcelain. We were ushered to table 11, way off to the side, tucked behind a decorative hedge wall near a fire exit. Our view was a concrete service hallway. Simon and Celeste were front and centre, flanking my father like security detail. Their name cards were printed in embossed gold. Mine was handwritten, crooked, misspelled. Mrs. Isla Trenor, Isla, like the Scotch, not even the courtesy of my real name. I laughed under my breath. It wasn't even bitter anymore, just tired. Simon spotted us first. He was already surrounded by a small circle of investment bros, laughing, nodding, holding court like a prince in his element. Isla, he said, grinning like he was amused to see me alive. "Didn't expect you." Then to his friends, "My little sister runs a book thing, right? Non-profit or whatever?" I opened my mouth, but he'd already turned back to someone talking about a 9-figure exit strategy. Celeste looked up from the appetizer station with a quick flick of her eyes. She was wearing crimson satin, perfectly fitted, with her fiancé, Dr. Smile, a plastic surgeon, with a chin cleft that looked carved by committee. She gave me one of those polished, barely there smiles. "That dress," she said, tilting her head. "Sensible. You always were practical." I nodded. "You look nice too." She barely heard me. I could feel the eyes, the whispered math in people's heads. Who is she again? The one they don't talk about? The soft one? The failed one? A woman across the table, my dad's third cousin, I think, leaned toward me. So what is it that you do now, dear? I run an independent publishing house, I said. She blinked. Oh, how sweet. A hobby business keeps you busy, I'm sure. Before I could fake a smile, Noah stepped in, calm, gentle. Actually, Seedlight just landed a city literacy grant, and one of their books got optioned for a film last spring. The woman blinked again, then turned back to her salmon tartare like she hadn't heard him. Noah squeezed my hand under the table, and I suddenly wanted to scream and disappear at the same time. A few minutes later, someone touched my shoulder. I turned, expecting maybe a familiar smile, but it was my Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, regal, cold. She leaned in like she might kiss me, but stopped short. Isla, you look, well. Then her voice dropped, soft but sharp. Try not to take up too much space tonight, sweetheart. You know how he gets. I blinked at her, but she'd already glided away, her perfume trailing behind like rosewater and restraint. The lights dimmed around dessert. The room shifted into silence. One by one, the speeches began. First, the CEO of Trenor Capital. He called my father a visionary strategist and the very definition of legacy. People nodded like they'd memorized the script. Then Simon. He spoke confidently, with just the right amount of self-deprecating charm. He praised Dad's unwavering discipline and tactical mentorship. Not once did he say Dad, always Thomas Trenor, always the man. Then Celeste. She framed her speech like a medical case study. She joked that our father graded our report cards like quarterly earnings. Laughter rippled across the room. Then it was his turn. Thomas Trenor. He didn't need a microphone. The room shifted when he stood, like planets adjusting to their orbit. Tonight isn't about me, he began. It's about what endures after the desk is cleared. About legacy. He paused, lifted his glass. Simon, my strategist. Celeste, my compass. Applause burst. And then he looked at me. His face didn't change. No malice, no fire, just indifference. And Isla, you may leave. It didn't come out loud. It didn't need to. The room froze anyway. Forks stopped. Heads turned. 75 people sat perfectly still as I absorbed the words I'd already feared for years, just never thought he'd say aloud. I felt Noah shift beside me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. He just kept standing there, my father, calm as ever. Smiling. No one said a word. Because no one was surprised. Not really. They had seen it coming. They just didn't think he'd say it out loud. I stood. My chair scraped. Noah stood too. But before I could turn away, before I could even process what was happening, I heard the sound of another chair moving behind me. Someone else stood up. And in that moment, I didn't know it yet, but the entire room was about to shift, not because of me, not because of Noah, but because someone I hadn't seen in years was about to speak my name. And this time, the whole room would listen. The room held its breath. I stood frozen, halfway between shame and fury, when a familiar voice cut through the silence like a warm knife through ice. Excuse me. I believe that seat belongs to someone far more deserving. Heads turned. Even my father's mask cracked for a fraction of a second. There she was, Amira Holt. Her voice, strong and low, carried through the golden hush like a bell you didn't know you needed to hear. She stepped out from the crowd near the back, wearing a tailored black blazer, her signature locks pinned up, gold hoops catching the light. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. Not since the night her novel launched in our tiny bookstore and the line wrapped around the block. She walked slowly, deliberately, through a sea of stunned guests who instinctively parted like she belonged more than I ever had. My father's brows pulled together. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Amira smiled, not wide, just enough. "The woman your daughter believed in when no one else would." You could feel the ripple spread. People shifted in their seats. Some pretended to sip wine they didn't want anymore. She stopped beside our table, turned to the crowd and said calmly, "I wasn't planning to speak tonight. I wasn't even sure I should be here." But then I heard a man try to dismiss the very person who changed the trajectory of my entire life. So, here I am. She looked at me then, and I felt the weight of it, like someone had just pulled me out of a freezing lake. Isla Trenor didn't just publish my book when everyone else said it was too angry, too political, too black. She listened. She saw me. When I had no address, no credentials, no agent, she gave me pages and space and dignity. There was a beat of stunned silence, then the clink of someone setting down their fork too slowly. Amira glanced around the room. "Some of you know my name now, but you didn't 2 years ago, and you wouldn't without her." My father opened his mouth, probably to reclaim control, but Amira didn't even look his way. "Let's talk about legacy, since that's what this night is about." She turned fully toward him now, calm, fierce. "Legacy isn't just wealth or status, it's what you leave in the people you tried to silence." She raised her glass, not to him, not to the room, to me. To Isla, who published truth when it was inconvenient, who held space when others shut doors, who showed up, quietly, consistently, without asking for applause. She looked me in the eyes. "You didn't belong here tonight, Isla, not because you're unworthy, but because this room isn't big enough for what you've become." It hit me like a wave, not pride, not even relief, something deeper, something like exhale after years of holding in air. Noah reached for my hand under the table. My father stayed stone-faced, but for the first time in my life he didn't look in control. He looked cornered and quiet. Noah stood up, and this time the room didn't resist. "I'd like to add something." My father muttered, "This doesn't concern you." But Noah didn't even glance at him. My wife spent her 20s being called a failure, being cut off, erased, talked over, and still she built something people believe in, something real. He turned toward me. "You don't need their names or their legacy, Isla. You built your own." And then his voice dropped just a little. "But for what it's worth, you were never the problem. Their silence was." I stood, slowly. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I just stood and looked around. The faces that had looked right through me an hour ago? They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't dismissing me as the girl with the book hobby. They were watching someone they couldn't define anymore. I turned toward my father. "You don't get to write me out of the story anymore." Then I looked at Amira, raised my glass back, and said quietly, "Thank you for seeing me when I didn't know I still wanted to be seen." And with that, Noah and I walked out. No slamming doors, no yelling, just quiet power. As we reached the elevator, one of my father's long-time colleagues, a man who hadn't looked at me once all night, nodded. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. But it felt like something cracked, not in me, in them. We didn't talk in the car for a while. Boston lights blurred past the window. I stared at my lap, trying to process the storm that never exploded, but still changed everything. Finally, Noah said, "You okay?" I nodded. "He'll never forgive us," he smiled. "Then we're finally free." And I realized, in that moment, I hadn't just left a party. I had walked away from a lifetime of waiting for permission to exist. And that was the beginning. We left Boston a month later. month. Not in a rush, not in anger, just with clarity. Noah got an offer from a non-profit in Seattle, developing accessible tech for public schools. I didn't hesitate. We packed up our apartment, boxed up the books, left the gold-trimmed city behind. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was escaping. I felt like I was choosing peace. Our new house was small, sunlit, and slightly crooked, built in the 1950s with floorboards that creaked like they had stories to tell. There was no grand foyer, no marble, no oil portraits of men trying too hard to look important. But there were warm wood shelves stacked with novels and baby books and poetry. There were mugs that didn't match, and a kitchen table we actually sat at every morning. And laughter. So much laughter. 1 year later, I stood barefoot in that kitchen, holding our newborn daughter against my chest. She was sleeping, her tiny fingers wrapped around the edge of my sweater, like she already knew this was home. Noah was outside, grilling in the drizzle, chatting with neighbours who'd become like family. There was music playing softly and the smell of rosemary and garlic in the air. It was quiet, but not empty. Seedlight Press had grown too. We launched a new imprint called Thai Sin, focused entirely on memoirs from people estranged from their families. The submissions came fast. Hundreds of voices, all saying the same thing in different words. I was invisible, but I never stopped hoping someone might hear me. I read everyone like it was a mirror. I cried over some. I emailed back personally when I could. It wasn't just publishing anymore. It felt like reparenting the parts of people that had been discarded, including my own. I kept a photo from our wedding on the mantel. Noah and me mid-laugh, frosting on his nose, sunlight bouncing off the trees behind us. The frame had cracked the night my father slammed our apartment door and told me I was an embarrassment. I never replaced it, because only the frame broke. We didn't. Sometimes Simon sends a message, nothing deep, mostly business tips, or saw this article, thought of you. We talk cautiously, kindly. Celeste never reached out. My father never apologized. He never called, never wrote, never said my name again as far as I know. And honestly, that silence used to feel like a wound. Now, it's just quiet, and I've filled that quiet with a life I chose. The other night I was rocking my daughter to sleep. The rain was tapping the windows. The room smelled like lavender and warm milk. I looked down at her perfect little face and whispered, "You don't have to earn my love. It's already yours." She stirred, pressed her cheek deeper into my chest, and something shifted inside me, because I realized I wasn't just speaking to her. I was speaking to the little girl I used to be, the one who slid stories under her father's door, hoping for a note back, the one who stood alone at the edges of family photos, the one who tried so hard to be enough. She didn't need to try anymore. She was home. If you made it all the way here with me, thank you. And if you've ever felt like the forgotten one in your own family, I see you. I was you. Tell me below, what would you say to the younger version of yourself if they were listening right now? Seriously, I'll read it. I think they need to hear it.